Ready to feel more confident with PES statements? Whether you are a student, dietetic intern, new dietitian, or seasoned dietitian, you might be feeling stuck with PES statements. In this video, we will go through what a PES statement is, why they're helpful, how to write them, and some examples. This video is brought to you by DSC, an online learning platform and client handouts hub for registered dietitians and dietetic students. Let's start at the beginning. What is a PES statement? A PES statement is your nutrition diagnosis that is part of the nutrition care process. It is a structured sentence and is usually a part of your chart note to help communicate your nutrition diagnosis. Now, a nutrition diagnosis is not the same as a medical diagnosis. It is very important not to confuse the two. The nutrition diagnosis is the issue that you, as the nutrition professional, are going to address with nutrition intervention, such as inadequate intake of a certain nutrient, not a medical diagnosis like diabetes or celiac disease, which would require a medical doctor to diagnose. A PES statement is the sentence that is used in your chart note to communicate your nutrition diagnosis. Writing PES statements can feel complicated, so here at Dietitian Success Center, we've created a nutrition PES statement cheat sheet, a free resource with 17 pages of sample PES statements for dietetic practice. Get your free nutrition PES statement cheat sheet in the link in the description below. Why do we need PES statements? PES statements are useful for defining and communicating the nutrition-related problem that can be improved or resolved by nutrition intervention. They help to summarize your nutrition assessment and give justification for the next steps of the nutrition intervention and monitoring steps. So, how do we write a PES statement? A PES statement has three parts: the problem, etiology, and signs and symptoms. P is the problem. What is the nutrition related problem that can be improved or resolved through nutrition intervention? E is the etiology. What is the root cause of the problem? The nutrition intervention targets or will lessen the signs and symptoms of this. And S, the signs and symptoms. The signs and symptoms that provide evidence about the problem and the etiology. These should be based on your nutrition assessment and can be monitored to determine the effectiveness of the nutrition intervention. A simpler way to break this down is by asking yourself, P, what is happening? E, why is it happening? And S, how do you know? These sections are combined in a structured sentence by the phrases related to and as evidenced by, as in the problem related to, the etiology as evidenced by the signs and symptoms. Now, let's learn how to write each section of the PES statement, starting with the problem. What is unique about the problem section of the PES statement is that you will choose your problem based on the nutrition care process diagnosis statement terminology, which is a specific phrase. There are three domains that the problem in your statement might fall under: intake, clinical, or behavioral environmental. Intake problems deal with too much or too little energy, nutrients, fluid, etc., or increased requirements. The intake is the most preferable domain to choose your problem from whenever possible, because it's more likely that you as the dietitian can address problems within this domain. Clinical domain is medical and physical conditions. This would include things like swallowing difficulty, weight or growth concerns, and malnutrition. And lastly, behavioral environmental covers knowledge, attitudes, and beliefs, and the physical environment, such as access to food and food safety. An example of a nutrition problem within the intake domain is inadequate energy intake. This problem is the specific phrase from the NCP standardized terminology. And you could also use the term suboptimal in place of inadequate and still be within the terminology. You can do a quick check of your PES statement problem by asking yourself the following questions. Can I, as the dietitian, improve this nutrition diagnosis? Is the most important problem being addressed? And is it clear in your assessment that this is the main problem? For example, in order for you to indicate that inadequate energy intake is the problem that needs to be addressed, you would need to ensure that you've done a dietary history assessment through a 3-day food record, 24-hour recall, or hospital calorie count, for example, to show that this is actually the main problem. The etiology is our next step. The etiology is the root cause of the problem that the dietitian can address or at least lessen the signs and symptoms of. So, what is causing our problem that we identified in the previous step? The etiology is what we will be addressing with our nutrition intervention. There should be just one etiology, but it does not necessarily require standardized terminology. To build off our example problem of inadequate energy intake, depending on the client's unique situation, our etiology, or the words that come after related to, could be decreased appetite, increased energy requirement, or maybe nausea and vomiting. Something else you could add to your etiology to make it even more specific is secondary to or due to. So it would become decreased appetite secondary to opioid medication, increased energy requirement due to stage 4 pressure injury, or nausea and vomiting secondary to chemotherapy treatment. The more specifically and clearly you can address the root cause of the problem, the better. For example's sake, let's go with inadequate energy intake related to decreased appetite. You can check your etiology by asking yourself the following questions. Is this the root cause of the nutrition problem? And will I be addressing this or the signs and symptoms of this in the intervention? Next, the signs and symptoms. Remember from the beginning of the video, this is where we have to provide proof that a nutrition problem exists. It helps to provide quantitative and qualitative data to support the problem. And it's what we will monitor to follow up with our client. You can list multiple signs and symptoms, and they do not require standardized terminology. For example, if our PES statement so far is inadequate energy intake related to decreased appetite, how do we know the client has inadequate energy intake and a decreased appetite? How can we monitor whether our intervention is improving their appetite or energy intake? And we can find this data in our assessment. So maybe our signs and symptoms are unintentional weight loss of 6% in 1 month, patient report of low appetite, estimated energy intake from calorie count 1,000 kilocalories less than estimated requirement, and observation of untouched meal trays for 2 meals per day for 5 out of 7 days. So, our signs and symptoms here are specific. They come from our assessment and they help to provide evidence for our problem and etiology. Also, they can be monitored to observe the effectiveness of our intervention. Check your PES statement signs and symptoms by asking yourself the following questions. Will measuring the signs and symptoms help to evaluate progress? Are they specific enough that I can monitor the improvement of the nutrition diagnosis? So, our final PES statement is inadequate energy intake related to decreased appetite, as evidenced by unintentional weight loss of 6% in 1 month, patient report of low appetite, estimated energy intake from calorie count 1,000 kilocalories less than estimated requirement, and observation of untouched meal trays for 2 meals per day for 5 out of 7 days. And we did add a few medical abbreviations in here just to keep it a bit shorter. Now, we can check the entire PES statement by asking the following questions. Is the PES statement based on the nutrition assessment data? Is the PES statement clear and concise? Is this PES statement factually correct and specific to this client? Let's practice with a sample PES statement. Remember, you want to design your own PES statement based on your unique client assessment and nutritional needs. This is a simplified example for the purpose of explaining the PES statement process. Meet Sarah, a 45-year-old female who recently visited her doctor and was diagnosed with hypertension. Her blood pressure readings have been around 139/90. She is referred to us for nutrition counseling. As part of Sarah's initial appointment assessment, she completes a 3-day food record. From the 3-day food record, we can see that she consumes a significant amount of sodium-rich foods in her daily diet, mostly from heavily processed foods such as fast food burgers and fries, canned foods, and processed meats, as well as packaged salty snacks like chips, pretzels, and salted nuts. From a quick calculation, we can see that she is consuming approximately 4,000 milligrams of sodium per day, which is 2,000 milligrams higher than the recommendation in the area we practice. So let's go through a PES statement example. What is our main problem? There are two common mistakes that dietitians and dietetic students will make here. Mistake number one, choosing the medical diagnosis as the problem. So, for example, if you were to write hypertension as the problem. And mistake number two, making up your own problem rather than using NCP diagnostic terminology. For example, if we said eats too much sodium, which isn't an NCP term, we can instead choose a specific term from the NCP diagnostic terminology that relates to the nutrition problem we will be addressing. So for Sarah, we'll choose excessive intake of sodium. For our etiology, we want the root cause of the problem that our intervention will address. What if we were to choose excessive intake of sodium related to hypertension? Well, hypertension isn't what's causing Sarah to consume too much sodium. Yes, Sarah is eating more sodium than what would be recommended for those with hypertension, but she's also consuming more sodium than what would be recommended for the general population as well. She's eating about 4,000 milligrams of sodium per day versus 2,300 milligrams per day for the general population and 2,000 milligrams per day for individuals with hypertension. So her sodium intake is higher than the general population, regardless of her hypertension diagnosis. Alternatively, if we look at our assessment, the main thing we noticed from Sarah's diet history is that her diet is mostly focused on heavily processed meals and packaged salty snacks. So the cause of the problem would be frequent consumption of high sodium foods. Now, our signs and symptoms. How do we know that Sarah has excessive sodium intake? That she frequently consumes high sodium foods? And how can we monitor to see that our intervention is effective? Well, we know from her 3-day food record there was primarily high sodium meals and snacks. Her estimated daily sodium intake was 4,000 milligrams per day. She has an elevated blood pressure with an average of 139/90 and was diagnosed with hypertension. And we can monitor whether our intervention results in any changes in her blood pressure. So our PES statement becomes excessive intake of sodium related to frequent consumption of high sodium foods, as evidenced by dietary history high in fast food and salty snacks, estimated sodium intake greater than recommended amount, and a diagnosis of hypertension with average blood pressure of 139/90. After our intervention to address Sarah's frequent intake of high sodium foods, we can monitor her diet history, estimated sodium intake, and blood pressure levels to assess the effectiveness of our intervention. Is there a different PES statement you would have chosen for this client? Let us know in the comments. For more information on PES statements, check out our blog post, PES Statements. And don't forget to download our free PES statement cheat sheet, available from the link in the description. Good luck with writing your PES statements.